according to data just released by the Center for Monitoring the Indian Economy, or the CMIE, the unemployment rate has shot up to 27.1% in the week ending the 3rd of May. In the month of April this year, it was 23.5%. And this unemployment rate is expected to climb further, which is, as the CMIE puts it, expected because the lockdown, as it gets prolonged, is going to lead to more job losses. Now, here's one number that gives you a sense of how bad things are. If you compare the same average of 2019-2020, that entire year, the fall in jobs in April is a massive 30%. That's a loss of 122 million jobs. Small traders, wage laborers account for most of these losses. They've been the most severely hit during the lockdown, says the report. And again, to give you an example, in this group, the employment dropped from an average of 128 million people who were employed last year in 2019-20. That dropped down to 116 million in March, and then 37 million people in April, which means more than 91 million people have lost their jobs in just the span of 1 month. What's coming up next? Well, Mahesh Vyas, the head of the Center for Monitoring the Indian Economy of the CMIE that brought out this report, joining us now. Mr. Vyas, very grim figures there. In fact, your report highlights that these job losses are across the board, whether it is big companies, small companies, salaried people, wage laborers. This is hitting everybody.
That's right. And this is what is most disturbing to us. But this is what the data tells us, that it's not only the hawker on the street who's out of a job. It's not only a small trader who's out of a job. That's expected. So when you have a lockdown, when you have the country shut down, it's obviously not possible for these people to find employment. They cannot do their small trade. They cannot do their usual occupations that they do. But what is stark in what we found is that this has spread now to business persons and to salaried employees. So salaried employees are the more safer job holders in a sense, but we saw that nearly 18 million salaried employees lost jobs in April 2020 compared to 1920, as you explained earlier. This says that as the lockdown continues, it starts hitting those sections that were hitherto kind of safe. But I think what's more difficult to deal with over here is that even businessmen are saying that we are unemployed. Now, what does that mean? If your shop is closed for a day or two or even for a week or so long as you are reasonably confident that you would be able to go and open the shop once the economy comes back to shape, you do not say that you're unemployed. You say you're employed, but the shop is shut for now, or the workplace is shut for now. But what we are seeing is a fairly large number of business persons are saying that our businesses are shut and we are unemployed.
Now,
which means,
I'm sorry, does that mean that they're not confident that things will be back on track soon, that, the disruption is expected, even if the lockdown is lifted, it's not going to be that easy to get back to work, as it were?
That's right. They feel that their shops are not going to open. Their businesses have been more or less ruined to a point that even if the lockdown is lifted tomorrow, they may not be able to go back to their old businesses. Now, this is dreadful in the sense that if businesses are feeling that they cannot go back to their jobs, to their businesses tomorrow, they lay off people effectively, whether you tell them or not. So it's not only about the vulnerable sections of society, which so far we believed were the small traders, were the hawkers, were the plumbers who stand on the street looking for a job every day, or construction site people. It's not about those vulnerable people anymore. It's a lot more than that. It goes to salaried employees and it goes to businessmen as well.
Finally, Mr. Vyas, what then is the road ahead? Because what are the potential further losses that we're looking at if the lockdown was to be extended, especially in red zones, which are zones where you have the most economic activity, whether it's in Mumbai or the national capital. So, if this goes on for a few more weeks, are we still looking at, catastrophic numbers?
I think it is logical to divide the country into red, green and orange zones, because you have to face this removal of the lockdown. and we have to see how this zoning helps us in containing the virus. At the same time, from an economic point of view, it's important to recognize that you cannot have silos of growth and remaining parts kind of locked down. You cannot have rural India working while urban India is shut down, for example. You can have some activities, but it cannot continue for long. So you can have this zoning for maybe a couple of weeks. Right. But if it extends beyond that, the zoning means nothing, at least insofar as economics is concerned. To just give you a small example, in the month of March, where we had the lockdown only for a week or 10 days or so, all the essential commodities like electricity, petroleum refinery products, fertilizers, all of them registered declines, although these were essential commodities, which means essential commodities without a working non-essential commodity cannot grow. It can only give you a minus 18% in petroleum refining.
So we can't live in silos forever. I think that is the point, and therefore, like you said, what happens after the next couple of weeks will be crucial in determining how we get back on track and how fast we're able to get back on track. Mahesh Vyas, thanks very much for joining us this evening. And we've got Yamini Iyer, the President and Chief Executive of the Centre for Policy Research, Shailja Chandra, also former Health Secretary, former Chief Secretary of Delhi, also with us. And you know, I really wanted to talk tonight about sort of the confusion that prevails on the ground even as we unlock. I know it's Yamini Iyer, we are a very complicated country and it's not going to be easy to exit from a lockdown either. But I want to just hold up one example of how complicated things are. This is a Home Ministry order and I've actually got it circled on the screen as well. You know, on migrants. And I swear, if someone can translate this into English for me, I'll give you an award. You know, it says, the MHA orders meant to facilitate the movement of such stranded person who had moved from their native places just before the lockdown period but could not return on account of restrictions. The facilitation envisaged in the aforesaid orders is meant for such distressed persons but not extended to those categories of persons who are otherwise residing normally at places other than the native places for purposes of work and who wish to visit their native places in normal course. I swear, this is what an MHA order says, Yamini Iyer. And I think this order kind of sums up why things are so confused on the ground. You've told industries to open up in certain zones. How do people get there? You know, there's no public transport. There's so many issues on the ground. So we're just tangled in bureaucratic red tape now, aren't we?
It's a very complicated exercise, which has only been made more complicated by the bureaucracy's love for red tape and complexity. The bureaucracy in India has traditionally used its files and its bureaucratic language to communicate with each other. This is perhaps one of those very critical moments when that language is so crucial to every aspect of our everyday lives, and we're getting to see one of the most challenging aspects of our bureaucracy that have been urgently crying for reform, its ability to be much more open to the public that it serves and much more transparent and communicative effectively with the public that it serves. But you know, of course, we've made things more complicated by going into very detailed minutiae of every decision, which in fact is something that is best left to be decided at the level at which programs get implemented. So I think part of this malaise that we are seeing is also a consequence of a very deep tradition of centralization in our bureaucratic behavior.
Absolutely. And I think I've heard people saying, Shailja Chandra, you know, can I take my dog out, you know, to the park for a walk? Do I need to check the MHA guidelines on that? And the other confusing layer in all of this are the resident welfare associations who are sort of on their own trip. You know, there are some of them who are not allowing domestic helps to come in, others who are allowing it. So they seem to have interpreted things very differently. So is there a better way we can do this? Or is this just the way it's going to be?
Nidhi, before I get on to the subject of RWAs and dogs being walked, I would like to respond to what Yamini said. I think these orders, bureaucratic, bound in red tape, written in bureaucraties, are not meant for you or for Yamini. They're meant to be interpreted by civil servants. And I would request you to ask any civil servant, can he make head or tail out of it? I'm sure he can. And if you want me to explain it to you, I'll be happy to, but let me not waste your time. These orders are... Sorry?
Go ahead, ma'am. Go ahead.
I was speaking. I would rather just continue without interruption, please. I can't see who it is, so I would really request you to let me continue. It is very clear what that order said. If you want, Nidhi, I will interpret it for you. I don't think there's a single senior officer who would not know what it meant. And it was intended purely because there was confusion about who could go back and for what they could go back. Coming back to your RWAs and dogs being walked, these are very, very minor things. Considering what is happening in the country, considering the number of, you might say, cases, the escalation, I think this whole business about whether you can walk dogs or bring your maidservant in is really a very, very tiny part of the whole spectrum. And to spend time debating on that is not something
That's just
which
an
I
example.
consider worth my
Ma'am,
while.
two things here. That is just an example to show how confusing the orders are. And if the Home Ministry is going to issue orders that bureaucrats have to read, they're being put in public domain so that people can read them. And I think, Yamini, the point is that as citizens, we have a right to know what we can and can't do.
Yes,
and at the moment,
do.
there is a lot of confusion. I mean, now, Yamini, just on this question of bringing the serious issue is how do we get our economy back on track and fight COVID-19, right? Now, a lot of small industries, small companies, other companies, they just haven't been able to open up. They're saying our employees can't get here. We don't have public transport. People can't move around. So there's still going to be a long, long battle ahead to get things back to where they were.
No, absolutely. It's getting workers to factories is one part of the problem, but more importantly, creating an environment of trust building where your labor who are now trying to find their way home because of the very, very horrific circumstances that they have had to confront through this lockdown period. Under what conditions can we build trust for those who are trying to go home to actually stay, given what we have put our labor, our workers through? The second big issue, I think, is around the lack of clarity on what kind of economic support package, whatever you might call it, is going to come. What is the government's economic roadmap? Because until, particularly I think for the small and medium enterprises, until they are going to start up today after having been closed for about 45 days, their loss of working capital, they are going to be confronting very serious issues, and they have to now start factories keeping in mind COVID norms. All of this requires some clarity. And in that, this red, orange, green, I think is further adding to the problem, because one of the real challenges you're going to face is if I'm today green and I'm opening up, there's no guarantee that tomorrow I may not turn red. And if that were to happen, what is the kind of protections I will have? Because that will in fact impact my decisions on how to start up, how to ramp up, and where to go next. And one last thing on the orders, I think one of the challenges with this multiplicity of orders also is that, while I think certainly senior bureaucrats within the system are speaking to each other, and perhaps they do understand the complexity of its language, the number of orders that have sort of come as the system is confronting a new problem every day has meant, I think, that many parts of the system have not fully absorbed what, right down to the last mile, what each of these orders are expecting them to do. And I think we've seen that most effectively in the challenges around supply chain, movement of trucks. It's smoothening out now, but this was very much part of the problem over these last 40 days that have caused some of the challenges that Mahesh was talking about around essential commodities and getting at least some of the key supply chains that were allowed to move.
All right. Thanks very much, Yamini Iyer, Shailja Chandra, joining us, giving us some perspective there on that big story as we all try to make sense of the exit from this lockdown.